The October evening air carried the scent of expensive cologne and whispered judgments as Elena Vasquez stepped from her modest sedan onto the circular driveway of the Chin family estate. Wherever you're watching this from tonight, whether it's your cozy apartment or sprawling house, I want you to imagine walking into a place where you know you don't belong. Drop a comment and let me know what state or country you're tuning in from, because this story about family money and hidden truths might hit closer to home than you think. The mansion loomed before her, its Georgian columns and manicured hedges broadcasting old money in every carefully placed brick. Tonight marked the 10th anniversary of her husband Marcus Chin's medical practice, and his family had insisted on hosting the celebration at their ancestral home. Elena smoothed her simple black dress, the one she'd worn to 3 previous family gatherings because it was the only one that didn't draw comments about her extravagant spending. Through the tall windows, she could see the warm glow of crystal chandeliers illuminating clusters of well-dressed guests. The medical elite of the city had gathered to honor Marcus, and she knew exactly where she ranked in their estimation. Somewhere between the hired help and an unfortunate charity case. Elena pushed through the heavy oak doors and immediately felt the familiar chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. Dr. Margaret Chun, her mother-in-law, swept across the marble foyer like a queen holding court. Her silver hair was pulled into an elegant chignon that probably cost more than Elena's monthly grocery budget, and her pearl necklace caught the light with each calculated gesture. Margaret's eyes landed on Elena with the precision of a surgical instrument. Her smile never wavered, but her voice dropped to that particular tone reserved for disappointing relatives and persistent salespeople. She said, "My dear Elena, how lovely that you could make it. I was just telling Senator Bradford's wife about Marcus's remarkable journey from medical school to establishing the most prestigious cardiac surgery practice in the state." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but Margaret had already turned toward a distinguished couple hovering nearby. She continued speaking as if Elena had simply evaporated from existence. She explained that success runs in the Chin family, going back 4 generations of physicians and surgeons. Her son's dedication to excellence has always been unwavering, despite the various distractions and challenges he's faced over the years. The word distractions hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Elena understood perfectly that she was the primary distraction in question. She moved toward the gathering crowd, hoping to find Marcus among his colleagues and perhaps engage in a conversation where her presence might be acknowledged as something more than a social inconvenience. Dr. Patricia Chun, Marcus's younger sister and a successful neurologist, appeared beside Margaret with 2 glasses of champagne. Patricia had inherited the family's sharp cheekbones and sharper tongues, and she wielded both with surgical precision. She remarked that she was just discussing with Mother how difficult it must be for Marcus to maintain his professional reputation when personal choices create such complex social dynamics. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. She had learned over the past 8 years of marriage that responding to these calculated barbs only provided more ammunition for future attacks. Instead, she excused herself and made her way toward the bar, where she could at least serve a functional purpose. Marcus stood near the grand piano, his tall frame commanding attention as he regaled a group of medical colleagues with stories from his residency days. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his custom-tailored suit fit like it was designed specifically for this moment, and his laugh carried the confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. He caught Elena's eye across the room and offered a brief nod before returning to his animated conversation about a particularly challenging surgery. Elena began arranging champagne flutes on silver trays, a task that felt natural after years of being relegated to hostess duties at family gatherings. The hired catering staff moved around her efficiently, and she noticed how they acknowledged her presence with polite nods while the family guests looked through her as if she were part of the furniture. Dr. Richard Chun, Marcus's father and the patriarch of this medical dynasty, approached the bar with Senator Bradford and another man Elena didn't recognize. Richard's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room, and his words were clearly intended for a broader audience than his immediate conversation partners. He spoke about the importance of strategic partnerships in building a medical practice, emphasizing how critical it was to surround oneself with people who understood the sacrifices required for true success. Richard continued by noting that some people were naturally suited for the demands of professional excellence, while others simply lacked the background and breeding necessary to appreciate such achievements. Elena's hand tightened around the champagne bottle she was holding, but she continued pouring glasses with steady precision. The senator's wife, a thin woman with calculating eyes, leaned closer to Richard with obvious interest. She commented that it must be challenging for successful families to navigate relationships with people from very different social circumstances. Richard nodded gravely and replied that sometimes love makes young men blind to practical considerations. He explained that wisdom comes with experience, and mature individuals learn to prioritize long-term stability over temporary emotional attachments. The conversation drifted toward discussions of prenuptial agreements and family trust funds, with Richard explaining the importance of protecting generational wealth from those who might not understand its true value. Margaret's voice carried across the room as she spoke to a group of prominent wives about Marcus's promising political future. She mentioned that his name had been discussed for several important medical board positions, and that he was being courted by the State Medical Association for leadership roles. However, she added with practiced concern, public service required careful attention to image and associations. One of the women, Dr. Evelyn Morrison from the hospital board, nodded thoughtfully and observed that political aspirations required spouses who could navigate complex social situations with grace and sophistication. Margaret sighed delicately and replied that some people were simply born to such roles, while others might need extensive coaching to avoid embarrassing situations. Elena moved through the crowd like a ghost, refilling drinks and removing empty plates while conversations flowed around her as if she were invisible. She caught fragments of discussions about medical conferences in Switzerland, investment opportunities in pharmaceutical companies, and the challenges of maintaining multiple vacation homes. The casual mentions of expenditures that exceeded her annual income were delivered with the same tone others might use to discuss grocery shopping. Patricia approached with two older women Elena recognized from previous gatherings, but whose names had never been offered for introduction. Patricia gestured toward Elena and commented that Marcus had always been too generous for his own good, always willing to help those less fortunate, even when it created complications for the family. She explained that his charitable nature was both his greatest strength and his most concerning vulnerability. The women nodded sympathetically, and one of them remarked that successful men often attracted people who saw opportunity rather than genuine partnership. She added that families had a responsibility to protect their accomplished members from those who might not have their best interests at heart. Elena excused herself to the kitchen, where she could find a moment of respite from the constant barrage of calculated cruelty. The catering staff moved efficiently around stainless steel counters, and their professional courtesy felt refreshingly genuine after hours of social warfare, disguised as polite conversation. Through the kitchen window, she could see Marcus on the terrace, gesticulating enthusiastically as he described some medical procedure to an enrapt audience. His success was real and well-earned, and Elena felt genuine pride watching him in his element. But the distance between them had grown with each family gathering, each subtle suggestion that he could do better, each implication that she was holding him back from his true potential. Margaret entered the kitchen like she owned every space she occupied, which technically she did. She approached Elena with the kind of smile that preceded particularly venomous observations. Margaret commented that she hoped Elena was enjoying the celebration, and that it must be gratifying to see Marcus receiving the recognition he so richly deserved. She continued by noting that success at this level required sacrifices that not everyone could fully understand or appreciate. Elena finally found her voice and replied that she was very proud of Marcus and everything he had accomplished. Margaret's smile sharpened like a blade being honed, and she observed that pride was certainly appropriate, though she wondered if Elena truly grasped the magnitude of opportunities that lay ahead for Marcus. She explained that the next phase of his career would require strategic decisions about partnerships, both professional and personal. The implication hung between them like a challenge, and Elena realized that this entire evening had been carefully orchestrated. This wasn't just a celebration of Marcus's professional achievements. This was an intervention, a coordinated family effort to make her understand exactly where she stood in their hierarchy and what her future role would be. Margaret stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. She said that Elena seemed like a sweet girl. Really she did. But sometimes sweetness wasn't enough when dealing with the complexities of a high-profile medical career. Margaret explained that she had seen many young women over the years who believed that love alone could bridge the gap between vastly different social worlds. Elena found herself backed against the marble kitchen counter, the cold stone pressing into her spine as Margaret continued her carefully orchestrated assault. Margaret's pearl earrings caught the overhead lighting as she tilted her head with practiced sympathy. She observed that Elena's background, while perfectly respectable in its own way, simply hadn't prepared her for the demands that came with being married to someone of Marcus's caliber and potential. The kitchen staff had discreetly retreated to the far end of the room, suddenly finding urgent tasks that required their complete attention. Elena realized she was trapped in this conversation with no witnesses and no escape route that wouldn't appear rude. Margaret seemed to sense her advantage and pressed forward with surgical precision. She continued by noting that Marcus had always been too kind-hearted for his own good, always willing to see the best in people even when others might have serious reservations. Margaret explained that as his mother, she felt a responsibility to protect him from those who might not fully understand the sacrifices required to maintain the family's reputation and standing in the community. Patricia Chin appeared in the doorway like she had been summoned by some invisible signal. Her designer heels clicked against the kitchen tiles with the rhythm of an approaching storm. Patricia smiled at Elena with the kind of warmth typically reserved for persistent telemarketers. She commented that she hoped she wasn't interrupting anything important, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what conversation she was joining. Margaret welcomed her daughter with obvious relief and replied that they were just having a lovely chat about family expectations and future planning. Patricia moved to stand beside her mother, creating an effective barrier between Elena and the kitchen exit. The two women shared the same predatory smile, and Elena felt like a deer that had wandered into a carefully constructed trap. Patricia began by saying that she had been meaning to ask Elena about her contributions to the household finances, noting that modern marriages required such careful coordination of resources and responsibilities. She explained that as a successful neurologist, she understood the importance of each partner bringing something substantial to the relationship. Elena's mouth felt dry as she attempted to formulate a response. She managed to say that she worked at a small firm downtown and tried to contribute what she could to their shared expenses. Patricia's eyebrows rose with exaggerated interest, and she asked what type of work Elena did at this mysterious firm. Before Elena could elaborate, Margaret interjected with obvious skepticism. She said that she had always assumed Elena worked as some type of administrative assistant or receptionist, which was perfectly honorable work, but hardly the kind of career that could support the lifestyle Marcus was accustomed to maintaining. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks and replied that she worked in the legal field, though she kept her voice deliberately vague. Patricia laughed with genuine amusement and asked if Elena meant she was a paralegal or perhaps handled filing for a small practice. The condescension in her voice was so thick it felt like breathing through honey. Margaret nodded approvingly at her daughter's assessment and added that she had always suspected Elena's work was more clerical than professional. She explained that there was certainly no shame in honest work, but families like theirs required careful consideration of how different types of employment might affect their public image and social standing. The conversation was interrupted by voices from the main room, where Elena could hear Marcus's father discussing the family's financial planning with obvious pride. Richard's voice carried clearly through the open doorway as he explained to someone how pleased he was that Marcus's medical school debt had finally become manageable after years of careful budgeting and family assistance. Patricia's attention shifted toward her father's voice, and she commented that it had been such a relief when Marcus finally got his student loans under control. She explained that medical school debt could be absolutely crushing for young doctors, and that the family had been concerned about how those financial pressures might affect his career choices and personal decisions. Margaret added that they had all made sacrifices to help Marcus achieve his potential, and that seeing him established in such a successful practice made every difficult year worthwhile. She noted that financial stability was crucial for someone considering a move into medical administration or political service. Elena listened to this discussion with growing curiosity, particularly noting how the family spoke about Marcus's debt in past tense. She had never been included in conversations about their finances, and Marcus had always been somewhat secretive about his educational expenses. She found herself studying Margaret's diamond bracelet, which caught the kitchen lighting with every gesture. The piece looked antique and valuable, probably worth more than most people earned in a year. Patricia's watch was equally impressive, a delicate Swiss piece that Elena recognized from a magazine advertisement with a price tag in the five-figure range. For a family that had supposedly struggled with medical school debt, they certainly displayed wealth with impressive consistency. Elena's phone buzzed in her purse, and she apologized as she stepped away to answer the call. The caller ID showed her assistant's number, which was unusual for a Saturday evening. She answered with a crisp, professional tone, asking about the status of the Morrison Pharmaceutical contract review. Her assistant's voice came through clearly as she explained that the opposing counsel had requested an extension on the merger documentation and that the client was pushing for a conference call first thing Monday morning. Elena responded that she would review the latest filings tomorrow and prepare her recommendations for the early meeting. Margaret and Patricia had stopped their conversation entirely, both women staring at Elena with obvious confusion. She ended the call and returned her phone to her purse, noticing their puzzled expressions. Margaret asked if Elena's employer required her to work weekends, which seemed rather demanding for what she had assumed was a part-time clerical position. Elena replied that legal work sometimes required irregular hours, especially when dealing with complex corporate transactions. Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to skepticism, and she asked what Elena meant by corporate transactions. Before Elena could respond, voices from the main room drew their attention toward a new conversation. Marcus was speaking with enthusiasm about the expansion plans for his practice, explaining to a group of colleagues how the additional surgical suites would position him perfectly for the regional medical center contract. His voice carried the confidence of someone discussing a foregone conclusion rather than a hopeful possibility. Dr. Morrison, one of the hospital board members, congratulated Marcus on his vision and noted that such expansion required significant capital investment. Marcus replied that the financing was already in place and that he expected to break ground on the new facility within 6 months. Elena found herself genuinely surprised by this news, since Marcus had never mentioned any expansion plans or discussed the financial implications with her. She wondered how he had secured funding for such an ambitious project, especially given the family's previous concerns about debt management. Margaret and Patricia exchanged meaningful glances, and Patricia commented that Marcus had always been brilliant at strategic planning. She added that success at his level required the kind of long-term thinking that not everyone could appreciate or understand. Elena excused herself from the kitchen and moved toward the main room, where she could observe the family dynamics from a different angle. She noticed how other guests deferred to the Chun family members, how conversations paused when they approached, and how their opinions were solicited on topics ranging from medical policy to local politics. Margaret's jewelry collection became more apparent as Elena studied her throughout the evening. Beyond the diamond bracelet, she wore emerald earrings that probably cost more than most people's cars, and her engagement ring featured a stone that could have funded a small business. Patricia's husband, Dr. James Wheeler, had joined the group and was discussing his recent purchase of a vacation home in Aspen. He mentioned the property with casual indifference, noting that the skiing wasn't quite as good as their place in Switzerland but would serve adequately for quick weekend trips. Elena's simple gold wedding band suddenly felt painfully modest in comparison to the wealth displayed around her. Marcus had proposed with a ring from a mall jewelry store, explaining that they needed to be practical about expenses while he was still establishing his practice. She had appreciated his fiscal responsibility at the time, but now wondered if his modesty about spending applied only to purchases that involved her. Margaret approached Elena again, this time accompanied by Dr. Morrison's wife, who had been introduced earlier as the chairwoman of the hospital auxiliary board. Margaret explained that they were discussing the upcoming charity gala and the importance of having the right people involved in organizing such high-profile events. Mrs. Morrison commented that successful fundraising required individuals who understood how to navigate complex social situations and could represent the medical community with appropriate sophistication. Margaret nodded sadly and replied that not everyone was suited for such demanding roles, and that sometimes good intentions weren't sufficient when dealing with major donors and community leaders. Elena realized that this conversation was another carefully constructed message about her inadequacy for Marcus's future social obligations. She excused herself again and moved toward the terrace, where she could observe Marcus interacting with his colleagues without the constant commentary about her shortcomings. Through the French doors, she could see Marcus gesturing animatedly as he described some medical procedure to Senator Bradford and another distinguished gentleman. His passion for his work was genuine and infectious, and Elena felt the familiar mixture of pride and sadness that had characterized their relationship for the past several years. She loved seeing Marcus in his element, respected by his peers and recognized for his genuine talent and dedication. But the distance between his professional success and their personal relationship had grown wider with each family gathering, each subtle suggestion that she was holding him back, each implication that he deserved someone more suited to his elevated status. Margaret's voice drifted from the kitchen, where she was now speaking with the catering staff about arrangements for Marcus's upcoming birthday celebration. Elena caught fragments of the conversation, including mentions of exclusive venues and guest lists that would apparently require careful curation to ensure the appropriate social mix. Elena twisted her wedding ring around her finger, feeling the weight of 8 years of marriage and the growing sense that she had become an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to cherish. The simple band caught the light briefly, a modest symbol of promises made in a different world, before disappearing back into shadow. Elena moved back toward the main gathering, hoping to find a moment of connection with Marcus amid the swirling conversations about medical achievements and social expectations. She approached the group where her husband stood holding court, his voice animated as he discussed surgical techniques with obvious expertise and passion. Marcus noticed her approach and smiled briefly before returning his attention to Dr. Morrison, who was asking about his plans for the upcoming International Cardiac Surgery Conference in Geneva. Marcus replied that he was absolutely planning to attend, noting that the conference represented an incredible opportunity to present his research on minimally invasive techniques. Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly and commented that such conferences were essential for maintaining one's reputation in the international medical community. Senator Bradford added that global recognition was particularly important for physicians considering moves into medical administration or public health policy. Elena waited for Marcus to mention that she would be accompanying him to Geneva, as they had discussed months earlier when the conference invitation first arrived. Instead, Marcus continued enthusiastically about the professional networking opportunities and the chance to collaborate with European colleagues. Margaret appeared beside the group as if summoned by invisible signals, her timing impeccable as always. She commented that family trips to Europe were so wonderful for strengthening relationships and creating lasting memories. She added that the Chun family had always valued travel as an educational experience, and that sharing such adventures with the right companions made them even more meaningful. Marcus nodded enthusiastically and replied that his mother was absolutely right about the importance of traveling with people who could fully appreciate the cultural and professional opportunities. He explained that the Geneva conference would be followed by a week-long tour of Switzerland and France, visiting medical centers and historical sites that held particular significance for his research. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized that Marcus was describing plans that had somehow evolved to exclude her entirely. She attempted to join the conversation by mentioning her excitement about visiting the medical museums in Paris, but Marcus's expression shifted uncomfortably. He replied with obvious awkwardness that the trip had become quite focused on professional networking and family bonding, and that the schedule would probably be quite boring for someone without a medical background. Margaret smiled with satisfied triumph and added that sometimes loving someone meant recognizing when they might be happier staying home rather than feeling out of place in unfamiliar professional settings. Patricia joined the group with perfect timing, carrying champagne glasses and radiating the confidence of someone delivering long-awaited news. She announced that she had just finished finalizing the travel arrangements for the Geneva trip and that the family accommodations were absolutely perfect for intimate professional discussions. Marcus thanked his sister for handling the complicated logistics and commented that having family members who understood the demands of medical careers made such planning much more manageable. Patricia replied that families needed to support each other through the challenges of professional advancement, even when it meant making difficult decisions about priorities and commitments. Elena stood among the group feeling like she was disappearing in real time, watching her husband and his family plan a future that clearly didn't include her. The conversations flowed around her as if she had already left the room, with Marcus contributing enthusiastically to discussions about European medical centers and professional opportunities. Dr. Morrison's wife leaned toward Margaret and commented quietly that successful marriages required both partners to understand their roles and limitations. Margaret nodded sagely and replied that wisdom came with experience, and that mature couples learn to pursue their individual strengths rather than forcing artificial unity in every situation. Elena excused herself from the group and moved toward the French doors leading to the terrace, needing air and space to process what she was witnessing. Behind her, she could hear Marcus explaining to Senator Bradford how grateful he was for family members who understood the sacrifices required for professional excellence. Outside on the stone terrace, Elena gripped the marble balustrade and stared across the manicured grounds toward the distant lights of the city. 8 years of marriage had led to this moment, standing alone while her husband planned international trips with his family and spoke about her limitations to respected colleagues. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the screen to see a text message from her law firm's senior partner asking about her availability for an emergency client meeting tomorrow morning. The irony wasn't lost on her that while Marcus's family discussed her professional inadequacy, she was being consulted on a multi-million-dollar corporate merger that could reshape the regional pharmaceutical industry. Elena typed a quick response confirming her availability and noting that she would review the case files tonight if necessary. As she finished the message, she realized that she had reached a decision that had been building throughout the evening. She was tired of being dismissed, tired of being treated like an inconvenient appendage to Marcus's success, and tired of allowing people to underestimate her capabilities. She walked purposefully toward the front of the house, where her modest sedan sat among the luxury vehicles that proclaimed their owner's financial success. From her glove compartment, she retrieved a leather briefcase that she had placed there earlier with the intuitive sense that tonight might require professional documentation. The briefcase contained years of carefully organized evidence about her actual career, her professional achievements, and most importantly, her financial contributions to Marcus's success. She had assembled the documentation months earlier during a moment of frustration, never imagining that she would actually need to deploy it like a legal weapon. As Elena walked back toward the house, she noticed a familiar black Mercedes pulling into the circular driveway. The license plate belonged to Harrison Webb, the Chun family's attorney, whom she recognized from previous family gatherings. Harrison was a distinguished man in his 70s who had handled the family's legal affairs for decades and commanded respect throughout the legal community. Inside, Margaret was announcing Harrison's arrival to the assembled guests with obvious pleasure. She explained that Harrison would be joining them for some important family business discussions, and that his presence made the evening even more special. Marcus moved to greet the attorney with genuine warmth, noting that Harrison's guidance had been invaluable throughout his career development. Harrison Webb entered the main room with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to handling significant legal matters. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his custom suit spoke of expensive tailors, and his handshake conveyed the authority of 4 decades practicing corporate and estate law. Margaret approached Harrison with obvious delight and explained that the evening had provided the perfect opportunity to discuss some important estate planning matters. She added that having all the family members present would make the conversation much more efficient and productive. Harrison nodded approvingly and commented that family unity was essential when dealing with complex financial planning and inheritance issues. Marcus expressed his appreciation for Harrison's willingness to combine business with pleasure, noting that such flexibility was one of the many reasons the Chun family had relied on his counsel for so many years. Margaret's expression shifted to practiced regret as she noticed Elena entering the room with her briefcase. She approached Elena with the kind of smile typically reserved for disappointing children and explained that Harrison would be discussing some rather dry legal matters that would probably be quite boring for someone without a background in estate planning. Elena felt the familiar heat of dismissal rising in her chest. But this time, she also felt something else. Power. Certainty. The knowledge that she held information capable of reshaping every assumption in the room. She set her briefcase deliberately on the marble coffee table, the leather making a soft but authoritative sound against the polished surface. Harrison glanced at Elena with polite curiosity, clearly wondering about her purpose in what Margaret had described as a private family meeting. Elena straightened her shoulders and felt her voice change from the submissive tone she had used throughout the evening to something entirely different. She addressed Harrison directly with professional courtesy and introduced herself properly for the first time in 8 years of family gatherings. Elena Vasquez, specializing in corporate law and educational financing, licensed to practice in 3 states, and senior partner at Davidson, Keller, and Associates. The room fell silent with the particular quiet that follows unexpected explosions. Harrison's eyebrows rose with genuine interest, and he replied that he was certainly familiar with her firm's reputation, particularly their expertise in complex medical financing and debt restructuring cases. Elena smiled for the first time all evening, and it was nothing like the apologetic expressions that had characterized her previous interactions with the Chin family. This smile carried the confidence of someone who had just decided to stop playing defense and start playing to win. Elena opened her briefcase with deliberate precision, the brass latches clicking in the sudden silence that had engulfed the Chun family's elegant living room. Inside, organized in clear protective sleeves, lay a collection of documents that would shatter every assumption the family had constructed about her over the past 8 years. She withdrew her law degree from Columbia University first, the heavy parchment bearing the official seals and signatures that proclaimed her Juris Doctor with highest honors. Margaret's face had gone pale as she stared at the document, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound. Elena placed the diploma carefully on the coffee table where everyone could examine it clearly. Next came her bar admission certificates, 3 separate documents showing her license status in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. The dates revealed that she had been practicing law for 15 years, well before she had ever met Marcus during his residency rotation. Patricia stumbled backward into one of the antique chairs, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Elena continued her methodical presentation by producing certificates from specialized legal education programs. Advanced Corporate Finance from Harvard Business School. Medical Debt Restructuring from the American Bar Association. International Pharmaceutical Law from Georgetown University Law Center. Each credential represented years of study and professional development that had occurred while the Chun family dismissed her as an uneducated gold digger. Harrison Webb moved closer to examine the documents, his experienced eye immediately recognizing their authenticity and significance. He commented with obvious admiration that Elena's educational background was truly impressive, and that her specialized training in medical financing was particularly relevant to current healthcare industry challenges. Marcus finally found his voice, though it emerged as little more than a strangled whisper. He asked Elena why she had never told him about her educational background or professional achievements. His face had taken on a grayish pallor that made him look significantly older than his 42 years. Elena turned toward her husband with the calm expression of someone delivering a prepared closing argument. She replied that she had mentioned her career multiple times during their early relationship, but that he had seemed more interested in discussing his own professional challenges and aspirations. She added that she had learned quickly to avoid subjects that didn't capture his attention. Patricia attempted to recover her composure and challenged Elena's claims with obvious desperation. She demanded to know how anyone could verify such extraordinary credentials, particularly given Elena's previous behavior and apparent lack of professional sophistication. Her voice carried the high-pitched quality of someone watching their worldview collapse in real time. Elena reached into her briefcase again and produced a business card holder containing her professional identification. She handed Patricia a card bearing her name, title as senior partner, and the firm's prestigious Manhattan address. Below her name, in small but clear print, was her New York State bar number and her federal court admission identification. She suggested that Patricia could verify her credentials immediately by calling the New York State Bar Association, whose number was listed on their website. Elena added that she could also contact the federal courts in Manhattan, where Elena had argued 12 cases in the past 18 months alone. Margaret finally managed to speak, though her usually commanding voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. She demanded to know why Elena had allowed the family to treat her with such disrespect if she possessed such impressive qualifications and professional standing. Margaret's hands shook as she reached for the business card Patricia had dropped on the marble table. Elena's response came with the measured cadence of someone who had spent years practicing courtroom advocacy. She explained that she had always believed character was revealed through behavior under pressure, and that she had learned valuable information about the Chun family's values by observing how they treated someone they perceived as inferior. She continued by noting that successful legal practice required excellent judgment about human nature, and that her experience with the family had provided crucial insights into their priorities and moral framework. Elena added that such information would prove invaluable in making important decisions about her future personal and professional relationships. Harrison Webb's expression had shifted from polite interest to genuine respect as he processed the implications of Elena's revelations. He asked Elena about her firm's specialization in medical financing, noting that such expertise was increasingly crucial in the current healthcare landscape. His professional curiosity was clearly engaged. Elena replied that Davidson, Keller, and Associates handled the majority of large-scale medical education financing on the East Coast. She explained that their client base included medical schools, teaching hospitals, and individual physicians seeking structured debt consolidation or practice expansion funding. Her voice carried the confidence of someone discussing familiar territory. Marcus attempted to interrupt the conversation, clearly struggling to process the magnitude of his miscalculations. He stammered something about Elena never mentioning the specific details of her work or the prominence of her position within the legal community. His confusion was genuine and painful to witness. Elena turned toward Marcus with an expression that mixed sadness with professional detachment. She reminded him of multiple conversations during their engagement where she had tried to discuss her cases involving medical professionals and healthcare financing. She noted that he had typically changed the subject to focus on his residency experiences or family expectations. Patricia made one final desperate attempt to maintain her family's narrative by suggesting that Elena's claims seemed suspiciously convenient given the current circumstances. She implied that Elena might be exaggerating her professional achievements to gain leverage in some type of marital dispute. Her accusation hung in the air like smoke from a failed gambit. Elena reached into her briefcase once more and withdrew a thick folder containing newspaper clippings and legal journal articles. The headlines referenced major pharmaceutical mergers, hospital acquisitions, and medical school financing deals where Elena had served as lead counsel. Her photograph appeared in several of the articles, clearly identifying her as a respected authority in medical law. Harrison Webb examined the articles with obvious fascination, recognizing several of the cases from his own professional reading. He commented that Elena's work on the Morrison pharmaceutical acquisition had been particularly brilliant, noting that her innovative structuring had saved the company millions in regulatory compliance costs. He added that he had followed her representation of St. Mary's Teaching Hospital during their expansion financing, and that her negotiation of the federal funding terms had been masterful. Harrison's professional respect was unmistakable, and his credibility lent weight to Elena's credentials in a way that no amount of documentation could have achieved alone. Margaret sank into the nearest chair, her carefully constructed evening dissolving into chaos around her. The woman she had dismissed as an uneducated social climber was being praised by their family attorney as one of the most accomplished medical lawyers on the East Coast. Her pearl necklace seemed to have lost its luster in the harsh light of reality. Elena closed her briefcase with the same deliberate precision she had used to open it. She looked around the room at the shocked faces of the Chin family, noting how quickly their expressions of superiority had transformed into confusion and something approaching fear. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the elegant furniture seemed rearranged by invisible forces. She addressed the group with the calm authority of someone who had just presented an unassailable case to a jury. Elena noted that she had enjoyed observing their family dynamics throughout the evening, and that their behavior had provided valuable insights into their character and priorities. She added that such information would prove quite useful in her future decision-making processes. Elena reached into her briefcase one final time, her fingers finding the manila folder that contained the most devastating evidence of all. The financial documents inside this folder would destroy every assumption the Chun family had made about money, success, and their own superiority. She placed the folder on the coffee table with ceremonial gravity. Harrison Webb leaned forward with obvious curiosity as Elena opened the folder to reveal bank statements, loan documents, and financial records spanning the past decade. The first document was a letter from Columbia Medical School addressed to Marcus Chun, dated 8 years earlier, thanking him for his generous alumni donation that had established the Vasquez Medical Education Scholarship Fund. Marcus stared at the document with growing confusion, clearly unable to process what he was reading. He stammered that there must be some mistake, noting that he had received a full merit scholarship to medical school and had never established any type of charitable fund. His voice carried the bewilderment of someone watching his personal history rewritten before his eyes. Elena's expression remained professionally neutral as she explained that Marcus had indeed received a full scholarship to medical school. However, she continued with deliberate precision. The scholarship had been funded entirely through her law firm's charitable foundation, which she had established specifically to support his medical education. The merit scholarship Marcus remembered so proudly had been her anonymous gift. Margaret's face had gone completely white, her carefully applied makeup standing out starkly against her pallor. She whispered that such a thing was impossible, noting that the family had celebrated Marcus's academic achievement and his ability to attend medical school without accumulating the crushing debt that destroyed so many promising medical careers. Elena produced the next document, a detailed financial statement from her personal banking accounts showing monthly transfers to Columbia Medical School totaling $400,000 over 4 years. Each payment was meticulously documented, with notations indicating tuition, fees, books, laboratory costs, and living expenses. Marcus's entire medical education had been purchased with Elena's money. Patricia attempted to maintain her composure by suggesting that Elena's documents must represent some type of loan arrangement that Marcus had forgotten to mention. She insisted that successful medical students often secured private financing for their education, and that such arrangements were perfectly normal in their social circle. Elena's response cut through Patricia's desperate rationalization with surgical precision. She explained that Marcus had signed loan documents acknowledging receipt of educational funding, but that the loans had been forgiven annually as graduation gifts from her firm's charitable foundation. She produced Marcus's signatures on documents he clearly didn't remember signing. Harrison Webb examined the loan forgiveness papers with obvious amazement, noting that such generous educational funding was extremely rare in the legal profession. He commented that Elena's firm must have possessed extraordinary resources to provide such substantial support for medical education. His professional assessment carried weight that made Elena's claims undeniable. Marcus finally found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. He asked Elena how she had possessed the financial resources to fund his medical education when they had been dating students with modest backgrounds. His question revealed that he had never bothered to investigate Elena's actual financial situation or professional achievements. Elena replied that her law firm had been extremely successful from its earliest years, particularly in the lucrative field of pharmaceutical litigation and medical malpractice defense. She explained that her partnership stake in the firm had generated substantial income throughout her 20s, well before she had met Marcus during his residency rotation. She continued by producing bank statements showing her annual income over the past decade. The figures were staggering, revealing that Elena earned more in a single year than most families accumulated in a lifetime. Her compensation as senior partner included base salary, profit sharing, and performance bonuses that placed her among the highest-paid attorneys in the region. Margaret stared at the financial documents with the expression of someone watching a natural disaster unfold in slow motion. She managed to ask how Elena had hidden such extraordinary wealth throughout their relationship, particularly given her modest clothing and simple lifestyle choices. Margaret's voice carried the bewilderment of someone discovering that reality bore no resemblance to her assumptions. Elena explained that she had learned early in their relationship that Marcus felt uncomfortable with displays of wealth, particularly when that wealth belonged to his girlfriend rather than his family. She had deliberately chosen modest clothing and simple accessories to avoid creating tension about their different financial circumstances. The next document Elena produced was even more devastating than the medical school records. The deed to Marcus's house, the elegant colonial that he had always described as his personal achievement and investment in their future together. Elena's name appeared as the sole owner, with Marcus listed as an authorized resident rather than a co-owner. Patricia grabbed the deed with shaking hands, scanning the legal language with desperate intensity. She announced that there must be some type of filing error, noting that Marcus had purchased the house during his residency with savings from his scholarship money and family contributions. Her voice carried the high pitch of someone clinging to a rapidly dissolving narrative. Elena's response was delivered with the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a confused child. She noted that Marcus's residency salary had barely covered his living expenses and that the house down payment had required $200,000 in cash. She produced the bank transfer records showing that the money had come directly from her personal accounts. She continued by explaining that the house had been purchased in her name alone to protect Marcus from potential liability issues during his medical training. Elena added that she had planned to add his name to the deed after his residency ended, but that their relationship dynamics had made such legal changes seem increasingly inadvisable. Marcus attempted to interrupt with protests about his contributions to their household expenses and his responsibility for the mortgage payments. His voice carried the desperation of someone watching his entire identity crumble. Elena listened to his objections with professional patience before responding with devastating facts. She produced mortgage statements showing that the house had been purchased outright with no financing required. Marcus had never made mortgage payments because no mortgage existed. The monthly amount he believed he was contributing to housing costs had actually been deposited into a savings account Elena maintained for household expenses. Harrison Webb shook his head with obvious amazement as he reviewed the financial documentation. He commented that Elena's financial planning had been extraordinarily sophisticated, and that her protection of Marcus's interests had demonstrated remarkable foresight and generosity. His professional assessment made Elena's revelations impossible to dispute. Margaret finally managed to form a complete sentence, though her voice emerged as little more than a croak. She asked Elena about Marcus's medical practice and the expensive equipment and office space that represented his professional success. Margaret's question revealed her growing understanding that everything the family had celebrated might belong to Elena rather than Marcus. Elena's smile carried no warmth as she produced the final set of documents. The incorporation papers for Marcus's medical practice, the equipment leases, the malpractice insurance policies, and the professional liability coverage. Every document bore Elena's signature as the financial guarantor and primary stakeholder. Marcus's medical practice existed entirely through Elena's financial backing and legal protection. Patricia made one last desperate attempt to salvage her family's dignity by suggesting that Elena's financial support represented normal spousal contributions to a marriage partnership. She insisted that successful couples often pooled their resources to support each other's professional development. Her voice carried the hollow ring of someone grasping at non-existent lifelines. Elena's response destroyed Patricia's final rationalization with mathematical precision. She noted that her financial contributions to Marcus's life totaled over $2 million, while his contributions to their shared expenses had never exceeded his monthly residency stipend. She added that their financial relationship had always been completely one-sided. Marcus sat in stunned silence, his face reflecting the dawning realization that his entire adult life had been funded by the woman his family had spent 8 years dismissing as an inferior social climber. His medical degree, his house, his practice, his professional reputation, everything he considered his personal achievement had been purchased with Elena's money. Elena closed the folder containing the financial documents and looked around the room at the devastated faces of the Chin family. Their expressions of shock and horror provided a satisfying conclusion to 8 years of systematic humiliation and condescension. The power dynamic had not simply shifted, but had been completely inverted. Elena rose from her chair with fluid grace, her movement commanding immediate attention from every person in the room. The submissive posture she had maintained throughout 8 years of family gatherings disappeared entirely, replaced by the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to controlling boardrooms and courtrooms. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the measured cadence of a judge delivering a verdict. She began by addressing Marcus directly, her tone professional yet personally devastating. She explained that his signatures on the loan documents, combined with his failure to disclose the true source of his educational funding, constituted financial fraud under both state and federal law. Elena noted that such deception could result in the revocation of his medical license and potential criminal charges for educational fraud. Harrison Webb's expression shifted to obvious alarm as he processed the legal implications of Elena's statement. He asked Marcus directly whether he had been aware of the source of his educational funding when he signed various professional licensing applications and insurance documents. Harrison's question carried the weight of someone who understood that Marcus's entire career could be destroyed by dishonest disclosure practices. Marcus stammered desperate denials, insisting that he had believed his scholarship was legitimate merit-based aid from the medical school. His protests sounded increasingly hollow as Elena produced additional documents showing his signatures on acknowledgement forms that specifically referenced private donor funding and loan arrangements. Elena continued her systematic destruction by explaining that Marcus's medical practice existed entirely through her financial guarantees and legal protections. She noted that the default clauses in the practice incorporation documents gave her complete ownership of all assets, equipment, and patient records if Marcus failed to meet his financial obligations to the partnership. She produced the practice partnership agreement, a document Marcus had signed without reading carefully during the excitement of opening his own surgical center. The fine print, which Elena had drafted personally, specified that failure to disclose material financial relationships or fraudulent representation of funding sources would trigger immediate transfer of ownership to the primary financial stakeholder. Margaret attempted to interrupt with frantic protests about Marcus's ignorance and good intentions, but Elena's raised hand silenced her with judicial authority. Elena explained that ignorance was not a legal defense for fraud, and that Marcus's failure to investigate or understand the documents he signed demonstrated either gross negligence or willful deception. Patricia made a desperate attempt to negotiate some type of compromise, suggesting that the family could work together to resolve any misunderstandings about financial arrangements. Her voice carried the pleading tone of someone who understood that their entire social standing was crumbling around them. Elena's response cut through Patricia's hope with surgical precision. She explained that the Chun family faced two distinct choices, both of which would be implemented according to her timeline and preferences. The first option involved a public divorce proceeding where Marcus's educational fraud, financial deception, and professional misconduct would be thoroughly documented in court records accessible to medical licensing boards and insurance companies. Elena noted that such public exposure would likely result in Marcus losing his medical license, his practice, his professional reputation, and his ability to work in medicine anywhere in the country. She added that the civil lawsuit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty would probably leave him financially destroyed and possibly facing criminal charges. The second option, which Elena described as significantly more generous than Marcus deserved, involved a private separation agreement where she would allow him to maintain his medical license and practice small-town medicine under her continued supervision and financial oversight. This option required immediate acknowledgement of her complete ownership of all assets and Marcus's agreement to modest support payments rather than the alimony he might otherwise claim. Margaret attempted to negotiate the terms of Elena's offer, suggesting that the family's social connections and influence might provide alternatives to the devastating choices Elena had presented. Elena's laugh carried no warmth as she reminded Margaret that the family's social connections were built entirely on Marcus's fraudulent success story. Elena continued by explaining that she had spent 8 years carefully documenting every slight, every dismissive comment, and every humiliating interaction with the Chin family. Her briefcase contained recordings, photographs, and detailed notes about their treatment of her, all of which would become public record if they chose the contentious divorce option. She described Margaret's kitchen conversation about Elena's inadequate background, Patricia's dismissive comments about her professional contributions, and Marcus's casual exclusion of her from the Geneva trip. Elena noted that such systematic emotional abuse would play very well in family court, particularly when combined with the financial fraud evidence. Harrison Webb attempted to intervene professionally by suggesting that all parties might benefit from cooling-off period before making irreversible decisions. Elena's response demonstrated that she had anticipated every possible escape route and closed them all systematically. She explained that her patience had been exhausted after 8 years of systematic humiliation. Elena noted that she had already filed preliminary paperwork with the State Medical Licensing Board, with instructions to proceed with formal fraud investigation unless she provided written cancellation within 30 days. She held all the leverage, all the evidence, and all the legal authority necessary to destroy Marcus's career completely. Patricia made one final desperate plea by reminding Elena of the love she must have felt for Marcus when they first married. Elena's response revealed the depth of her transformation from victim to judge. She replied that love required respect, honesty, and partnership, none of which she had experienced during her marriage to Marcus. She explained that watching Marcus allow his family to humiliate her repeatedly had killed whatever affection she might have maintained for him. Elena added that his willingness to exclude her from professional opportunities while living off her money had revealed his true character more clearly than any romantic gesture could have concealed. Marcus finally managed to form a coherent sentence, asking Elena what she wanted from him and his family. His question carried the broken tone of someone who understood that his entire life was now subject to another person's mercy. Elena's answer demonstrated that mercy would be offered strictly on her terms. She explained that Marcus could choose dignity through honest acknowledgement of the situation or complete destruction through public exposure of his fraud. Elena noted that she was prepared to proceed with either option, though she personally preferred the efficiency of private resolution to the entertainment value of public humiliation. Margaret made one last attempt to assert family authority by threatening to expose Elena's vindictive behavior to their social circle. Elena's response revealed that she had anticipated even this desperate gambit. She noted that Margaret's threats were meaningless since Elena's evidence would establish her as the victim of systematic fraud and emotional abuse. Elena gathered her documents with calm efficiency, placing each piece of evidence back into her briefcase with the precision of someone concluding a successful trial presentation. She announced that Marcus had exactly 24 hours to choose between private disgrace and public destruction. She added that her decision to offer any choice at all represented more generosity than the Chun family had shown her during 8 years of marriage. She walked toward the door with the confident stride of someone who had just reclaimed complete control over her life. Elena paused at the threshold and delivered her final observation to the stunned family. She noted that their treatment of her had revealed their true values more clearly than any amount of wealth or education could have concealed. Elena added that she looked forward to seeing how they would explain Marcus's sudden change in circumstances to their social circle. She suggested they might want to practice discussing reduced expectations and modest lifestyle adjustments. Her smile carried the satisfaction of justice finally delivered after years of patient planning. 6 months later, Elena's life had been transformed beyond recognition. Her law practice had expanded significantly after she accepted partnership offers from 2 major New York firms, recognizing that her expertise in medical fraud cases would be increasingly valuable. She had purchased a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, finally allowing herself to live according to her actual income rather than Marcus's comfort level. Marcus had chosen the private separation option and now practiced family medicine in a small upstate town, working under Elena's financial supervision and living in a modest apartment above his clinic. His income provided basic living expenses and monthly payments toward his educational debt, which Elena had restructured as a standard loan with commercial interest rates. Margaret Chin had been forced to explain Marcus's reduced circumstances to their social circle by claiming that he had chosen a more altruistic approach to medical practice. Her explanations satisfied no one, and the family's invitations to exclusive social events had decreased dramatically as their influence and wealth became obviously diminished. Patricia had attempted to maintain contact with Elena, apparently hoping to rebuild some type of relationship that might restore family access to Elena's financial resources. Elena had responded to these overtures with polite professional courtesy, treating Patricia exactly like any other acquaintance seeking legal services. Harrison Webb had become one of Elena's professional admirers, frequently referring clients to her firm and praising her handling of complex medical litigation. He had mentioned privately to several colleagues that Elena's strategic patience and legal preparation had been the most impressive demonstration of professional competence he had witnessed in 4 decades of practice. Elena often thought about that October evening when she had finally stopped pretending to be less than she was. The decision to reveal her true capabilities had required courage, but the results had proven that authentic power was far more satisfying than artificial peace. She had learned that love without respect was merely elaborate exploitation. On quiet Sunday mornings in her penthouse, Elena would review legal briefs while watching the sunrise over Manhattan, grateful that she had finally chosen her own dignity over other people's comfort. The simple gold wedding band had been replaced by a platinum ring of her own choosing, a symbol of promises she had made to herself about never again accepting less than she deserved. The Chin family had taught Elena invaluable lessons about human nature, social dynamics, and the importance of maintaining personal power in relationships. She considered their cruelty a form of expensive education that had ultimately made her stronger, wiser, and more successful than she might have become without their systematic challenges to her self-respect. What did you think of Elena's journey from dismissed housewife to empowered attorney? Have you ever been in a situation where people underestimated your abilities or contributions? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how you handled being undervalued or what you think about Elena's approach to seeking justice. Your stories and perspectives always make these narratives even more meaningful.